Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest here for the show today. And remember, if you're breaking the law, she may come get you. So, can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
So hello, Mary Beth O'Connor. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the short version of my story is the title of my memoir, which is From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction.
Okay, I would love to thank you for that. I would love to know about your past leading up into your present. It's an honor, by the way.
Thank you. And it's great to be here. I'm happy that you invited me. I really like to emphasize the connection between trauma and substance use disorder because it's such a common pathway. And that's what it was for me. I mean, I grew up with a mother who wasn't really connected with me and could be violent. And then when I was 9, she married my stepfather, and he was very violent with her. He was physically and sexually violent with me. And so when I found my first drug at 12, which was alcohol, and it was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine, which a lot of people know, what I noticed was how much better it made me feel. And so I started pursuing drugs right away. And so alcohol to weed to pills, did a lot of acid for a while. And then when I was 16, I found methamphetamine, which was my drug of choice. And I was shooting meth within 6 months. In high school, I was in full bore addiction. And I used until I was 32. I mean, it was a really long haul. And so finally, when I got sober, I, had to sort of build myself back up. I had a Berkeley degree, but a horrible resume because I couldn't hold a job because I was using meth. And I started at a really low level job. But by 6.5 years sober, I had worked my way up. And then I went to Berkeley Law. I worked at a big law firm, and eventually I became a federal administrative law judge. At 20 years sober, I always emphasize at 20 years sober, I became a judge, and I did that for 5.5 years. And then I took early retirement, and now I write and talk about recovery and substance use topics.
And how long were you a judge for?
5.5 years. I was a judge for 5.5 years. Yeah.
Okay, and what did your title do? Your administrative title of judge?
Yeah, I mean, there's of course a lot of different kinds of judges, Supreme Court justices down to traffic court judges, right? And so I worked for the federal government, and I was an administrative law judge. And for federally, what that means is you work for a specific agency. And I worked for Social Security. So most of my cases were people applying for disability benefits and other Social Security related matters.
Wow. Yeah, that's serious because what have you seen as far as Social Security cases and we're going to talk about your drug addiction in a second, how you recover, but like these cases, I noticed that, people don't really care about people that's on Social Security. They feel like they're just the extra expense, but I feel like there's somebody they worked hard to get to where they are, and they're making their retirement or their disability payments. And so my question is, what would you like to see change in Social Security all across the board in the United States?
Well, I mean, for disability, definitely there's not enough money in the system. Social Security, for example, was just voted by its employees the worst federal agent, the worst large federal agency to work for. So it's chronically underfunded, which means everybody's working at a hectic pace, and too many mistakes are made. And you're right. This is really important for people's lives when they're applying for disability and they're trying to get benefits. And even a delay has significant consequences, and it's just not properly staffed. And then there are some, problems with the rules and the way things operate that I personally would change. But mostly it's really that if the agency was better staffed, it would be more efficient and people would get answers quicker, which is really timely answer is important when you're not able to work.
One last question about this. Why do you think it's underfunded? Do you think they don't find it important enough?
I mean, a lot of federal agencies are in general underfunded, but I think they don't appreciate how much work it takes to process these cases and how hard the staff is working. And yet people leave because the salary isn't always what it should be in a lot of parts of the country. But yeah, I don't think that the government prioritizes getting people disability the way that it really should. They're not as concerned about it being slow as they really should be.
Well said. Tell me about what was that change in your life, Miss O'Connor, where you sat up there and you said, no, this is, meth use isn't for me no more. I think I want to go ahead and pursue my career in judging.
So, and please, Mary Beth, I no longer a judge. I'm retired. But for me, like a lot of people, it was a combination of things. So, like by 32, I was having physical problems because, meth is a really harsh drug on the body. I really couldn't hold a job. I say I had worked my way down the corporate ladder because I just couldn't hold a job. And I was just in despair, emotionally devastated. And my partner was ready to throw me out. So it was sort of all those things together that made me think, well, maybe I ought to try rehab, So it's not that I went in like confident that I could get sober. I really didn't know that I could. And it's not that I was 100% sure, but that's normal. Usually going from using drugs to thinking maybe I should stop to finding some confidence that if you do the work, you can succeed. That's usually a process. It's not usually sort of a snap my fingers. Now I believe it's possible. And I say that in part because I think it's important for friends and family to understand that there's ambivalence in the beginning. People aren't sure in the beginning, but that doesn't mean they won't succeed later.
Well said. What keeps me sober is knowing that there's failure out there. What keeps you sober in your world?
I will. I will say, I mean, I just had 30 years, and I know you had told me earlier you had 20. So, yay to us, right? But for me, it's really that I don't want to go back to that chaos. I don't want to go back to that misery. And so my life is so much calmer. I mean, life happens, but, sometimes things aren't great. Challenges happen, unhappy events happen, but I'm not making them worse, which is what I was doing when I was using drugs. And also, I needed to be sober to get my mental health under control because I had PTSD and I didn't know it, and it should have a severe anxiety. And I tried to do therapy when I was using, but it was impossible to make any progress because I was on drugs. And so the only way for me to be sort of my true self, my whole self, my productive self is for me, it requires total abstinence and sobriety.
And how did you get past, and what kind of advice would you have to give to a young woman, to an adult woman out there that has been sexually abused? So, how did you get past sexually being abused? And what kind of advice would you have to give them about how they can overcome it?
Yeah, so I had, sexual molestation from my stepfather, and then I had several different rapes, including one that was 3 men and 6 hours, and I thought I was going to die. It was really a horrifyingly terrifying situation. And so when I got out of rehab, I did understand that my trauma was sort of at the root of my drug use. And so I found a therapist who had expertise in trauma. And that is really what I needed. And if somebody today is struggling with that, I really encourage people to talk. It's okay to interview a therapist before you sign up with her, right? To make sure that what's her skill set in this area. Here's my life history. Have you handled cases like this? How many years experience do you have? What approach do you take? Because I did that. I looked for someone who I felt confident had the expertise that she could actually help me. And I was in therapy for a long time. I did individual for a couple of years, and then I did a few years in group therapy with other women with trauma histories. And that was really helpful to be in that group as well.
Okay, well said. And how do you feel like right now your life will be uncovered? I'm not going to ask what you're doing in the future, but how do you think your life will be uncovered with new ideas and new innovations towards you speaking at speaker events?
Yeah, so I will say I do read like a lot. There is, luckily, in the last 10 years in particular, there's a lot of studies, new science about addiction and recovery that we didn't used to have. And so I do keep up with all the new data that comes out, the new studies that come out, the new articles and opinion pieces, so I know where we are. And for me, that's part of feeling like when people ask me questions, when I'm interviewed or I speak at a conference, that I can talk from an informed space, that I'm sort of not stuck in what I was taught when I went in rehab in 93, right? I try to keep up with what's going on because a lot has changed in my 30 years as far as what we know and our understanding. And for me, this is, I always say, emphasize early retirement. And this is my sort of time to be of use in a new way, where I do speak at conferences, television, radio, podcasts. I write, I've had opinion pieces in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times. All that's on my website, junkie2judge.com. And then my book helps me out. But the goal is to sort of use my 30 years of lived experience with the knowledge that I'm accruing, but also that judge title, sometimes it helps people listen to me a little better, that I can share information and they can sometimes hear me a little more easily because I have the 30 years and I'm a former judge and I'm on the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery and things like that. So I try to use the tools that I have, the assets that I have to help people, to help educate and to reduce stigma and to help increase understanding.
Do you think that the statistics of the new things that are out, the new medicines and the new therapies that are out, are more accurate than the generation one therapies?
Well, definitely today we have more medications for opioid use disorder and for alcohol use disorder. There are actually really medications have very strong data. Like there's medications for opiate use disorder, buprenorphine and methadone, and they reduce the risk of fatal overdose by 60%.
Yeah.
And they significantly reduce cravings and they help people, get on the right path. And alcohol has drugs as well, but they're underprescribed. Only about 10% of the people who could use them get them. And I will say in the community, people of color, it's even worse. I mean, it's more, white people are more able to get these drugs than people of color. But that's sort of a general problem in our health system, right? That there's a disparity there. But for stimulants, there is no drug like that yet. There are drugs in studies, but there's no drug that's that's FDA approved to treat stimulant disorders as there is for opiates and alcohol.
Well said. Okay, so do you think that they're coming out with some of these drugs?
Yeah, there are definitely studies for looking for things for methamphetamine. There are some drugs that are being used off-label, to see, because there's sort of anecdotal evidence that they help. So they're definitely looking for it because it's been such a positive for the other drugs. So that would put us in the same ballpark. Right now for stimulants, what seems to work best is some cognitive behavioral therapy, and then also an approach called contingency management, where people are given small amounts of money for successes. So there are, like in California, there's a program where I think it's a 12-week program. If they give a negative drug screen, they might get $10 gift certificate or things like that. And it's these small amount of money, the data actually shows has a significant effect on people increasing their odds of success. In fact, the VA uses this as well. That's how good of a tool it is.
Yeah, I hear cognitive behavior therapy is like the gold standard of therapies. And they have this new light, not radiation, but new laser, without actually ripping into your skin, non-abrasive light that goes in your head and it monitors everything that you do, but it sends it helps balance your electrodes and your electrons and your neurons, and it makes your depression actually go down. And yeah, have you heard of that?
Well, I know there's what's called EMDR, which is yes. And that's very good for PTSD and anxiety as well. I know a lot of people with trauma. I'm sure today, if I was going in therapy with my history, they would do EMDR for me. So I agree. I know people that have had very positive experiences with EMDR.
What do you think the success rate would be if because the drug for stimulants should probably be like a neutral, because what's messed up is I used to do I'm sorry, let me cut that off. I never did methamphetamine knowingly, but I used to do heroin and hardcore drugs. I put it to you like that. I used to use with needles. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so I started taking Suboxone. I took
Right.
it 10 years after I was sober. I started having cravings again, but I never went there because I was on Suboxone 7, 8 milligrams and or 16 milligrams. I can't remember. But to get to the point, I recently got back on for only pain management, which didn't help. So I got back off. But I'll tell you this, it is a great drug for those who are on heroin, heavy drugs, and then they abruptly switch because it's a strong drug. It will knock you out, but it's very doable for people that are struggling with addiction. I think it is. I really do. Do you know anybody that was on Suboxone in your lifetime? It don't have to be a family member.
Yeah, I mean, Suboxone does have buprenorphine in it, and so I think it's a combination. Unless I'm misremembering, I think it's naltrexone and buprenorphine, but I'd have to double check. But I mean, the methadone and buprenorphine and Suboxone, if they're properly dosed, people shouldn't be getting high. They should just be sort of leveling out. Right, that's the goal. And often, like I have a girlfriend who was on methadone for like 12 years because she tried to get abstinent and she kept failing. And with methadone, she got a job, she held a job, she got a promotion, she was able to be a parent to her child. So, and I talked to her. I know what an opiate high looks like and sounds like. She wasn't high. She was just normal, it was leveling her out. And so some people use those drugs temporarily, like maybe 6 months to 2 years, and they're able to get off. And other people need them longer term. And a few people may even need them lifetime. But yeah, it is a narcotic, but it's not to get you elevated and so that you're in an opiate high. It's to sort of stabilize you. And it does stabilize people. And then you're not spending all your time trying to get drugs or trying to get money for drugs. And so you can live a normal life.
Yeah, you're right. I started using drugs when I was initially 12. It was my first drug was alcohol, and then at 15 I graduated to marijuana, and then from then I started using cocaine and anything I could get my hands on. But I really say these things because if I can get sober, so can, and you can get sober, so can other people out there. What kind of inspiration would you give to them, or advice would you give to them as far as trying to get sober?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple reassuring things. One is, sometimes we talk about how low the odds are of success. Only 10% of people who go to AA succeed or whatever, but that's really about each effort in your lifetime. 75% of the people who have a substance use disorder, which is, the modern term for addiction, 75% of people will recover. And the other thing is that it's better to sort of not wait for this nasty, horrible, vicious bottom. It's better to try to disrupt your addiction at an earlier point. And so we don't talk about how you have to have a miserable bottom anymore. Now it's like, a substance use disorder, like all mental health conditions, can be mild, moderate, or severe. Just like you can have mild, moderate, or severe depression, or mild, moderate, or severe anxiety. And I would have been at the very severe end, and it sounds like you would have been at the very severe end, and we got sober. So it's possible. But it's so much better if you can try to address it when you're in that more mild to moderate stage instead of waiting for things to get really, really horrible. So I always encourage people, if you think it's creating a negative impact on your life, and that's the definition of addiction, that you keep using despite negative consequences. That's the short definition. Don't feel like you need to have good war stories to stop. If it looks like it's
Yeah, I know, right? Yes.
if you think it's a problem, just disrupt it now. And some ways to do that is to just take a break. I mean, some people try a 30-day break and see that gives a lot of information, even if you try to stop, let's say, alcohol for 30 days. Sort of what's happening? When do you feel the impulse to use, like what's going on that's making you feel the impulse to use, or do you notice how much better you feel when you wake up without a hangover, or you're more productive, and all those things. It's what Dry January is about, that idea that taking that break provides good information on both sides, the positives of either stopping or doing less, and then the negatives of keeping going.
Well said, Mary Beth. And you know what else is something else that lacks between the moderate to early stages? It's the what ifs. What if I stop? Do I have the power to, or is the drugs taking over me type thing? You know, like they say, well, what if I don't quit? I think quitting is going to be the wrong thing, you know, and or their lives, it's their environment too, because they feel depressed, or you know, their environment isn't working for them. You know, the bad relationship, or you know, they're a single parent, or anything could be going on. And a lot of people these days suffer from mental health and depression, and I think we should get to the core root of that with like doctors, more doctors, you know, looking into psychiatrists, looking in and helping us, not trying to bash us per se, but help us, you know, actually, you know, leave it in control, the driver's seat to the person with the mental health, you know, illness, if that makes any sense.
You're absolutely right. I mean, mental health is underneath a lot of substance use. It's people they're sort of medicating in the wrong way, right? You're trying to self-medicate, and you don't and a lot of times you don't even realize it. You don't even understand that that's what you're doing, but it's not an effective way. Usually it's not going to get you the best result. You do have to often deal with what's going on underneath. And that's why I say, for me to get sober, stay sober, I knew I had to deal with my mental health. But for me to deal with my mental health, I had to be sober. So it's hard to stay. The way I say it is, it's hard to stay sober if your mental health is out of control. And it's hard to get your mental health under control if you're not sober when you have an addiction, right? They really go hand in hand. And today, if somebody goes in for substance use disorder treatment, they should be evaluated for mental health, for other mental health conditions on day one, like from the beginning. Because today they call that dual diagnosis, or co-occurring disorders, and both should be treated. And anybody going in for mental health treatment should be evaluated for substance use disorder too, because that often trails along. So they are connected. They have a high percentage, connection. And also that means the treatment needs to be connected. The recovery needs to be connected.
Well said. I have another question about your judicial years. So I wanted to know, what was the hardest class out of every class? Because I think it's like a 6-year type course. What was the hardest class you ever had to take? Was it logic? Because every lawyer that I talked to say is the logic.
That is interesting. So in law school is 3 years, right? And in undergrad is 4. In undergrad, the only B-, which was my lowest grade that I got at college, was in logic. It was in symbolic logic. It was symbolic logic, which is really like coding. That's what symbolic logic is. And my husband still brings that up. He rubs it in my face. It's like, you weren't even there. Why did I tell you this? But yes, symbolic logic was my lowest grade in college. I got a B-, and I worked hard for that B-, like way harder than I worked for some of my A's, So you're absolutely right.
And where do you see yourself going? Well, one last question about speaking. Tell me about you speaking and where you have spoken so far.
Yeah, so like I speak at conferences. For example, I spoke at a conference of the recovery professionals in higher education. So the college recovery professionals, I did a presentation about multiple peer support groups. In other words, 12 steps, as well as the options like LifeRing and SMART and Women for Sobriety and She Recovers. And I do things like I do keynotes. I speak at fundraisers for recovery organizations. I do a keynote for them. I speak to the National Alliance of Mental Illness chapters. I speak to humanist and atheist groups. And I train lawyers and judges. So I do they have continuing legal education requirements. And I created one on substance use. And I do that for attorneys. I do it for law firms, or I also do it for like I did it for the Women's Bar Association in Des Moines, things like that. So and then I do a lot of different types of podcasts and some television and radio. So it's a pretty wide variety of different opportunities, and I'm always looking for more. And you can always message me through my website, and if you have any good opportunities for me. But I do try to share information I think is important, like to destigmatize. It's why, like you, I own up that I shot meth. I really want to sort of make people understand that you can actually go from something as, miserable and to most people horrifying as shooting meth to actually a good, solid recovery. Let's, to be an example that that's possible. But I also talk a lot about that there's more than one way to recover, that not everybody does AA or NA. Some people do it a different way, and I did it a different way.
Where do you see yourself going for the future, Mary Beth?
I mean, I am retired, and so I try to keep all this part-time, which is a challenge because, it's hard to, to turn down any good opportunities because I want to be of use. I want to be of service. So right now it's, I view my retirement years as probably being the same, speaking and writing. And then I'm on the board. I'm on the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery. I'm on the board for She Recovers. So this is sort of a new time for me to be of service in a new way. I'm not working, but also, so I have time, but also I can talk openly because I'm not working. So I don't have to worry about professional consequences to telling my truth, to telling, my story. So it's been a sort of a real freedom to be retired and able to speak about everything without having to sort of put parameters around what I would say publicly.
Okay, and how can the people reach you, Mary Beth?
So my website is junkie2judge.com, and there's a lot of information there, including my opinion pieces. And you can message me through there, and I answer every message. I'm on X, Twitter at MaryBethO_, and I don't argue with people on Twitter. I provide information like the new studies that come out, articles, my recovery thoughts, my book, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, is on Amazon and all the usual sites. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Okay. And I want to stay on the line. I want to thank you guys for joining my show with Miss Mary Beth. And y'all take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.